This is a mixed decision process that includes both emotional and logical components in trying to decide, should I move in with a girl that I haven't even met yet? As we've discussed previously, many of our decisions that we make in life include both emotional and logical components. But there are better ways than to just make these decisions on a whim. So we want to go through our process and identify what is the real cost and risk for the emotional benefit. You may recall that we make decisions based on the best information we have at that point in time, and we go down that path. But we know that we must adapt sometimes. When new information comes in, we have to go back and reevaluate that decision and decide what is now the best choice with this new information. If you think back to the decision I had to retire early, I had a pretty solid plan at that point, but new information arrived. I received a message a while back from a girl in Florida who had seen my videos and just commented on them. We started chatting, and now I am being faced with the decision of, should I move to Florida and move into the house with her that she's currently building? Now, I understand that just asking that question alone makes a lot of you probably pretty uncomfortable. But why is that? Is it because of the risk? And sure, there are going to be risks, but we're going to talk through those risks as we go through the decision-making process. Let's start with the objective items. What was my plan before this new information? My plan was to stay in Texas, here, continue to live where I had my 3 cars and my 3 bikes, and at some point in the future, perhaps I would sell those, or most of them, and maybe move to a little condo in, say, Lauderdale Beach, Florida. That was kind of my plan. If I were to move in with her, how would that change my plan? Well, for one thing, it would speed up the timeline. So now Florida becomes a little sooner, let's say, but instead of a little condo where I have to get rid of all my toys, now it's going to be a different house. So now maybe I sell 1 car and maybe I sell 1 bike or something like that. But it still allows me to get to Florida and live at the beach sooner while having most of my toys and still living in a house and not a little cramped condo. So that's actually a good thing. I was already making plans to basically clean out the house, purge everything that I really don't need, and have all that efficiently ready for whatever happens in the future. So all that really does is speed up in terms of time what I'm doing, but it just means I'm getting this done sooner, so that's not an issue. What about the effect on resources? Well, as far as money goes, I haven't had the discussion with her about what rent would be or whatever, but in general, and you have to be careful, don't fall for the always 2 can live cheaper than 1 thing, because that's not always the case. But in general, I have expenses here of mortgage and all the other bills. So let's say even if I had those same bills over here with 2 of us living there, well, that's pretty much nil effect. It's basically about the same. If I sell a car and a bike, let's say, well, that's actually a plus here because I would have less insurance and fuel and whatever projects I do to them. So that could be a good thing. Florida does not have state tax, just like Texas does not have state tax, so that's not a big deal. What about time? Well, on large scale time, this would actually accelerate getting the house cleaned out, so that's a good thing. As far as the short-term day-to-day time goes, she's still going to be going to her job during the day. I'm still going to have my stuff to do during the day. So it's not necessarily that it's going to take more time, it's just going to be that the time for leisure will be spent differently because it'll be with her doing stuff instead of just on my own. So that's virtually no effect as well. Let's talk about health. Fortunately for me, this girl is big into fitness, has a very similar diet to me, so I don't really see a downside as far as her being a bad influence, if you will, on wanting to go out to the bars and drink all the time or eating crappy foods or anything like that, so that's a big plus. One of the biggest things for health-wise is clinical care. So right now in Texas, I have my network of doctors that have been taking care of me, but I wouldn't have that over in Florida. So I will have to reestablish a network of doctors. But one thing it does offer is in Florida, we would be here, but Jax, which is like 5 hours away where I used to live, has a Mayo clinic. And Mayo is obviously a very highly respected network. So possibly what I could do is have a local PCP, but because I can go to Jax where I have friends and her parents are, and Mayo Clinic is there, that may be an option. Plus, having someone like Mayo be able to look over my case, they may have different ideas and see things that maybe we didn't talk about here. So all in all, yes, there will be some logistical things, but nothing insurmountable there as well. Speaking of logistics, another item to consider are local suppliers. So here in Texas, I have AF1 Racing for the Aprilia, which is just an hour and a half up the road in Austin. I have my local CAD dealer, my local Porsche dealer, all those different things. Moving here, I won't know where those are, so I'll have to find the different support networks for there. And there's always going to be things like, you got to find a new barber, you got to find a new gym, or maybe on that note, we've talked about having a gym at home that we can both use as well. All the details do have to be figured out, but they're just details. The big things are really not having any major effect here. Another objective question to ask is, what's the risk? Well, there's two risk phases that I see. There is the risk phase of prior to moving in, and there's the risk afterwards. So if we look at prior to it, if the day before the move comes and we decide that's not what we want to do, then no big deal. I stay in the house in Texas, have everything, my life goes back to normal, there's no real sunken cost, not a big deal. If it happens after the move, so let's say now I'm living here and then something doesn't go right, well, now it's a little bit different, but I have options. If I'm here, I could always go back to Texas because I'd be renting my house out, which means that I could go back and live in it again. I'm already this far in Florida. Is that the point where I want to just go get a little condo at Lauderdale Beach and live there? The point is I have options, so even if something goes wrong, it doesn't put me in a bad spot. Now let's talk about the emotional components of the decision. And I understand that the emotional components can be very difficult to view through a logical eye, but let's walk through the process. We said in the beginning that it probably makes people very uncomfortable to even think or joke about the idea of cohabitation so early in the process that you haven't even had a chance to meet the person face to face. However, let's think about why that really is. For one thing, a lot of us my age, we were raised with the sayings like, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. And we had our parents telling us all the reasons things would never work. Anytime we had an idea or something we were excited about, well, it probably won't work because of this, or probably, well, you better think about this. And even though it was well intended to protect us from disappointment, in fact, my dad actually told me once that hope is the path to disappointment, but it was well intended to protect us. However, a lot of people came out of that kind of upbringing with a genuine fear of taking risks, of chasing dreams, of doing what they want to do because they were so risk adverse. For myself personally, fortunately, I've failed a lot of things. It doesn't faze me. I've tried a lot of different things, chased dreams, tried new things, and when they blow up in my face, I'm kind of okay with it because at least I got some new experience out of it. Secondly, we get nothing but bombarded daily with horror stories about relationships. It's divorce rates, it's fake dating profiles, it's somebody getting duct taped in a basement somewhere. All this forces society to create so many self-defense mechanisms that even though it used to be considered a gentlemanly thing to do to offer to pick up your date, now if you do that on a first date, you're going to get labeled serial killer. And we put other labels on what used to be good behavior. If somebody is honest and genuinely expresses interest, now that's considered bad instead of good. If we continue to fall into these traps, we become so jaded or so bitter that we end up cheating ourselves out of happiness, because even if something good comes along, we can't hardly believe it's possible, and there must be a catch. There must be some red flag or something wrong with it. Sure, right now I could just look at this and say, nah, this is just too good to be true, and that doubt would end up preventing it from becoming true, even though it might really be, and then you just become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Then you're no better than Orpheus in Greek mythology, whose doubt prevents him from taking Eurydice back to the living world, and she goes back down to Hades. From an emotional standpoint, my plan originally was today is me and the dog just going about our way, and that's it. So this is a very different plan, because now it would include someone else and her dog, and I think she has a cat too, but we're not going to hold it against her. So it's a very different path, but it should be a good change in the path. From an emotional benefit standpoint, I have learned to appreciate my single life with me and the dog. I do what I want day to day. I can be very selfish. It's very peaceful. There's no drama. I don't worry about having to get a hold of somebody or feel obligated to do things. So it's a Shaolin monk Zen lifestyle for me that I've learned to love. However, I've been in a solid relationship before, and I know they're extremely rare, but if you do find a good one, that person can be a real asset to your life, adding benefit to it and not a liability just pulling resources. So having known how good this can be, that to me is the value in the emotional benefit of doing this. Let's talk about the emotional risk of the decision. Unlike the objective risks, which have this inflection point around time of the move, emotional risk is more of a consistent line. It doesn't really depend on much more than time you spent with the person, and the longer you spend, the more emotional risk you have. The biggest risk that I see to this whole plan is my heart health. Now, one of the emotional components that can be considered in a decision is around ethics, morality, whatever you want to call it. So the question may be, is it ethical for me to enter a relationship knowing my health condition? In fact, that was one of the components driving me in the decision to stop the dating apps and stop dating altogether, because it just didn't make sense. However, new information comes along and it made me think back a little bit, and I do take this very serious because I've gone through losing Sunshine to cancer years ago, and it was the most gut-wrenching experience that I could never have imagined until it happened. However, as I think through it, I know now that I would never have traded any of the time with her, even if it avoided the pain at the end and loss. Therefore, ethically, what I decided to do was just be honest with the girl in Florida, make sure she's aware of the risk and the issues, and leave it up to her to make the best decision she can for herself, because she's going to have to go through, maybe not at the level I do, but she's still going to have to go through a decision-making process as well. Because we're dealing with emotional human interaction, it is physically impossible for me to sit here and try to assign any kind of probability of success to this plan. I could go through all the list of compatibilities, this, that, and the other, but at the end of the day, since we're dealing with this topic, sometimes you can't assign statistical probability, and maybe it's just better to feel right than to be right. If we reflect back on what we discussed in this exercise, our path has changed a little bit. The objective items have just sped up, so we're just getting things done earlier, and that's a good thing. The emotional path has changed drastically, but for the better. We've talked about the resource impact, and it appears to have pretty negligible impact on all three, the money, time, and health, which is a good thing. Maybe even a couple benefits in there. We talked about risk, and there's really no big risk jumping out at us. We definitely have options if something would go sideways later. We talked about the emotional risk of it as well. I won't be surprised if some of you are still sitting there saying this sounds ridiculous, and you're welcome to tell me I told you so if something goes wrong with it later, and that's fine. I found for me personally, I tend to regret more the things I didn't do than the things I did do, because if I do them and I fail, at least I learned something in the process and usually gain some kind of experience as well. Maybe it is too good to be true, and if I find that out, then at least I'll know. But to me, I'd rather do that than sabotage it with doubt just because the world around me doesn't know how to treat each other. And many of those people would say this is very illogical to do something like this or even consider it. However, think back to the whole point of this program. What are we trying to do? We're trying to be the best people we can, living the happiest life that we can with the resources that we have. So if something drops in our lap that seems like it would make us a lot happier, and it doesn't have much risk, doesn't cause us to deviate our lives that much, and costs us almost nothing, then you don't doubt that, you just do it. There are a ton of steps that have to happen from where we are today to renting a U-Haul. However, objectively, with our decision-making process, this looks like the best choice for me. Therefore, my path now is to pursue planning to move in with a girl that as of today, I have not even met face to face. Now, I know this is going to be very hard to absorb for a lot of you, so I'd be very interested in any questions or comments you have below. If you haven't done so, please subscribe to the channel below, click the little bell for notifications, check out the YCC merch store, see if there's anything you like, and let's use casual sense, but let's also live for today.